Sampling by Jasmine Coleman. In this presentation, we will determine what is sampling, the purpose of sampling, stages in the selection of a sample, types of sampling in quantitative researches, and types of sampling in qualitative researches. What is sampling? Sampling is the process of selecting a number of individuals for a study in such a way that the individuals represent the larger group from which they were selected. This image right here is a preview of some terms we're about to discuss: study population, sample, and the target population. What is a sample? A sample is a smaller, but hopefully a representative collection of units from a population used to determine truths about that population. What is a population? A population is the larger group from which individuals are selected to participate in a study. The target population. The target population is a set of elements larger than or different from the population sampled into which the researcher would like to generalize study findings. This image right here is basically a description of what we just went over. Who do you want to generalize to? The theoretical or the target population. What population can you get access to? The study population. How can you get access to them? The sampling frame, which is a list of all elements or other units containing the elements in that specific population. And who is in your study? None other than your sample. What is the purpose of sampling? The purpose of sampling is to gather data about the population in order to make an inference that can be generalized to that population. This image right here shows the stages in the selection of a sample. You will first have to define the target population, select a sampling frame, determine if a probability or non-probability sampling method will be used. You have to plan procedure for selecting sampling units, determine your sample size, select the actual sampling units, and then you'll be ready to conduct your fieldwork. Quantitative sampling. What is the purpose of quantitative sampling? The purpose of quantitative sampling is to identify participants from whom to seek some information. Some issues of quantitative sampling is the nature of the sample, the size of the sample, and the method of selecting the sample. Some important issues in quantitative sampling is representation. Representation is the extent to which the sample is representative of the population. Generalization is another issue in quantitative sampling. Generalization is the extent to which the results of the study can be reasonably extended from the sample to the population. Sampling error is another issue, and sampling error is the chance occurrence that a randomly selected sample is not representative of the population due to errors inherent in the sampling technique. Sampling bias is some aspect of the researcher's sampling design which will create bias in the data. You will also want to make sure that you follow 3 fundamental steps: identify the population, define the sample size, and select the sample. As I mentioned in the slide about the steps, there are 2 types of quantitative sampling, and that is probability samples and non-probability samples. Probability samples is also known as random sampling, and it is the best method to achieve a representative sampling. There are 4 different techniques in probability sampling. The first is random probability sampling. The second is stratified random samples. The third is cluster samples. And the fourth is systematic random sampling. Random sampling. In random sampling, all subjects have the equal opportunity to be selected. And random sampling has its advantages as well as its disadvantages. For one, random sampling is easy to conduct. It also produces a high probability of achieving a representative sample, and it meets the assumptions of many statistical procedures. Some disadvantages is identification of all members of the population can be difficult, and contacting all of those members of that population might prove to be difficult as well. But what is the selection process in random sampling? You will first want to identify and define the population, determine the desired sample size, list all members of that population, assign all members on the list a consecutive number, select an arbitrary starting point from a table of random numbers, and read the appropriate number of digits. Stratified random sampling. Stratified random sampling is when the population is divided into two or more groups called strata according to some criterion such as the geographic location, grade level, age, or income, and subsamples are randomly selected from each strata. As mentioned about random sampling, stratified random sampling has advantages and disadvantages. The advantages of stratified random sampling are that it produces a more accurate sample. It can be used for both proportional and non-proportional samples. The representation of subgroups in the sample. The disadvantages include identification of all members of the population can be difficult, and identifying members of all subgroups can also be difficult. The selection process of stratified random sampling includes identifying and defining the population, determining the desired sample size, identifying the variable and subgroups for which you want to guarantee appropriate representation, and classifying all members of the population as members of one of the identified subgroups. Cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is the process of randomly selecting intact groups, not individuals within the defined population sharing similar characteristics. Clusters are locations within which an intact group of members of the population can be found. Examples of these clusters would be neighborhoods, school districts, schools, and even classrooms. Cluster sampling also has advantages and disadvantages. Cluster sampling is very useful when populations are large and spread over a large geographic region. They are convenient and expedient. You do not need the names of everyone in the population, yet the disadvantage is that representation is likely to be an issue. The selection process when using cluster sampling is to identify and define the population, determine the desired sample size, identify and define a logical cluster, list all clusters that make up the population of clusters, estimate the average number of population members per cluster, determine the number of clusters needed by dividing the sample size by the estimated size of a cluster, and randomly selecting the number of clusters. And you want to be sure to include in the study all individuals in each cluster. Systematic sampling is selecting every subject from a list of the members of the population. You may want to know what the cuth is, but it'll be like the 5th or every 25th or the every 35th person. Advantages of systematic sampling include that it's pretty fairly easily done, yet there are disadvantages. The subgroups could pose a disadvantage, and some members of the population wouldn't have an equal chance of being included. The selection process is to identify and define the population. Determine the desired sample size. Obtain a list of the population. Determine what the cusp or the K is equal to by dividing the size of the population by the desired sample size, and start at some random place in the population list. Take every cusp individual on that list. Sample size. What is the sample size? The sample size is the size of the sample depends on a number of factors, and the researchers have to give the statistical information before they can get an answer to what the sample size is. For example, you have to have the information like the confidence level, the standard deviation, the margin of error, and the population size to determine what the sample size is. Non-probability sample. Non-probability random samples allow a procedure governed by chance to select a sample, and it controls for sampling bias. There are some sampling methods when using non-probability sampling, and it is convenient sampling, purposive sampling, and quota sampling. Convenient sampling is the process of including whoever happens to be available at the time. It is often called accidental or haphazard sampling. The disadvantages to convenient sampling is it poses difficulty in determining how much of the effect results from the cause or the independent variable. Purposive sampling is the process whereby the researcher selects a sample based on experience or knowledge of the group to be sampled. It is often called judgment sampling. The disadvantage of purposive sampling is that it produces potential inaccuracy in the researcher's criteria and resulting sample selections. Quota sampling is the process whereby a researcher gathers data from individuals possessing identified characteristics and quota. Disadvantages of quota sampling is that people who are less accessible or more difficult to contact, or maybe even more reluctant to participate, are underrepresented. Sampling and qualitative research. Researchers in qualitative research select their participants according to their characteristics and their knowledge. It is when the researcher chooses persons or sites which provide specific knowledge about the topic of the study. Some purposeful sampling methods in qualitative research include maximal variation sampling, which is when you select individuals that differ on certain characteristics. In this strategy, you should first identify the characteristics and then find individuals or sites which display that characteristic. Typical sampling. Typical sampling is when you study a person or a site that is typical to those unfamiliar with the situation. You can select a typical sample by collecting demographic data or survey data about all cases. Theory or concept sampling is when you select individuals or sites because they can help you to generate a theory or specific concept within the theory. In this strategy, you need a full understanding of the concept or the theory expected to discover during the study. Homogeneous sampling. Homogeneous sampling is when you select certain sites or people because they possess similar characteristics. In this strategy, you need to identify the characteristics and find individuals or sites that possess it. Critical sampling. Critical sampling is when you study an exceptional case which represents the central phenomena in dramatic terms. Opportunistic sampling. Opportunistic sampling is when it is used after data collection begins, when you may find that you need to collect new information to answer your research questions. And snowball sampling. Snowball sampling is when you don't know the best people to study because of the unfamiliarity of the topic or the complexity of events. So you ask participants during interviews to suggest other individuals to be sampling. When conducting all of these samplings, it is the researcher's ethical responsibility to safeguard by maintaining the understood purpose of the research. This concludes my presentation. These are my references. I hope you really enjoyed my presentation, and thank you so much for your time.